The story of David and Goliath, the power of faith and courage. The threat of Goliath, a world in fear. In the ancient land of Canaan, the Israelites, God's chosen people, were facing a monumental crisis. The Philistines, an enemy nation with a fierce and powerful army, had gathered on one side of a valley, while the Israelites stood on the opposite side, paralyzed with fear. The armies were in a standoff, unsure of how to proceed. Yet, the situation was far from a typical battlefield. It was a psychological war, one where the enemy was not just threatening with weapons, but with fear itself. And at the heart of this fear stood Goliath. Goliath was no ordinary warrior. He was a giant, towering over 9 feet tall, and his armor was a terrifying sight to behold. He wore a bronze helmet, carried a massive spear, and his shield-bearer walked in front of him, holding a shield that could have been a wall in itself. For 40 days and nights, Goliath taunted the Israelites. He didn't just issue a typical challenge, he mocked them, insulted their faith, and challenged them to send out a warrior to fight him. "If you can defeat me, we'll be your servants, but if I defeat your man, you will serve us," he bellowed, day after day, his voice booming across the valley. But despite being a mighty army, the Israelites stood frozen in fear. Each soldier saw only the size of the enemy, the strength of the giant, and the consequences of failure. Goliath represented everything they feared: power, aggression, and invincibility. His challenge was not just physical, it was emotional, psychological, and spiritual. He was questioning their identity as God's people, daring them to believe in their own worth, their own strength, and yet, no one dared to face him. And then, in the midst of this terrifying deadlock, a young shepherd named David arrived on the scene. He had been sent by his father to deliver provisions to his brothers, who were in the Israelite army. David, still just a boy, had no military training, no armor, and no reputation as a warrior. But when he heard Goliath's taunts, something inside him stirred. The giant's words cut through him not as threats, but as a direct challenge to his faith. Who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God? David asked in astonishment. David was not intimidated by Goliath's size, nor by the history of defeat that surrounded him. To David, the question was clear: if God is with us, why should we fear anything? The battle was never just between two men. It was a battle of faith, a question of whether the Israelites truly believed in the God they served. Goliath was more than just an enemy. He was a test of courage, of identity, and of belief. #### Part 2. David's faith, the courage to stand up. David's decision to confront Goliath was not just one of bravery. It was rooted in a profound, unwavering faith. While his brothers, who were seasoned soldiers, ridiculed him, and King Saul doubted his ability, David stood firm. The army around him saw only the size of the giant, but David saw something else: the limitless power of God. King Saul, hearing of David's boldness, tried to dissuade him, telling him, "You are only a youth, and this man has been a warrior since his youth." But David, without hesitation, recounted the times when he had protected his father's flock from lions and bears. "The Lord who delivered me from the paw of the lion and the paw of the bear will deliver me from the hand of this Philistine," David declared, full of conviction. For David, this wasn't just a fight for survival, it was a fight for faith, a fight to honor God's name. David's courage didn't come from his own strength, but from his relationship with God. He didn't feel the need for a sword or armor, as Saul suggested. Instead, he chose what was familiar to him: a sling and 5 smooth stones from a brook. David trusted that God would use his simple tools to achieve a miraculous victory. His faith wasn't in his slingshot. It was in the God who had always been there for him. The battle, he believed, was not his own. It was God's. As David walked toward the battlefield, there was no fear in his heart, only trust. His confidence was not in his own abilities, but in the fact that the creator of the universe was on his side. David's courage was not just in facing Goliath, but in facing the doubts of everyone around him. While the Israelites cowered in fear, David stepped forward, knowing that he had nothing to fear as long as God was with him. David's faith transcended logic. It wasn't about physical strength or skill. It was about standing firm on the promises of God. His faith was not a blind hope. It was a deliberate trust in God's character. And that faith became the source of his courage. David wasn't fighting a giant. He was standing up for God's honor, demonstrating that no earthly power, no matter how great, could stand against the will of the Almighty. Part 3. The Battle, a Miraculous Showdown. As David stood before Goliath, the giant couldn't help but sneer. "Am I a dog, that you come to me with sticks?" he mocked, seeing David without armor, without a sword. But David was undeterred. With the confidence of a lion, he replied, "You come to me with a sword and a spear, but I come to you in the name of the Lord Almighty, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied." David's words were not just a declaration of his faith. They were a declaration of God's supremacy over every earthly force. David picked up a stone from his pouch, placed it in his sling, and began to whirl it above his head. The soldiers watched, transfixed. They had seen armies clash, weapons clash, but never before had they seen a battle fought with such faith, such pure conviction. With a single motion, David released the stone, and it flew through the air, hitting Goliath squarely in the forehead. The giant staggered, then collapsed, face first to the ground, defeated not by strength, but by faith. For a moment, there was complete silence. The Philistine army, who had been so sure of their victory, stood stunned. The Israelites, who had been paralyzed by fear, erupted in triumphant cheers. David, a mere shepherd boy, had defeated the mighty Goliath with a single stone. It was a victory that transcended the physical realm. It was a victory of faith over fear, of courage over doubt. As Goliath lay defeated, the entire Israelite army surged forward, chasing the Philistines off the battlefield. David's victory was more than just a personal triumph. It was a shift in the hearts of the Israelites. The once feared giant had fallen, and with his fall, the fear that had gripped the hearts of God's people was lifted. David's victory over Goliath was not just a military success. It was a theological statement that no giant, no enemy, no power could stand against the power of God. David had shown the Israelites what true courage looked like: faithful, unwavering, and deeply rooted in trust in the Almighty. This wasn't just a story of physical victory. It was a story of spiritual victory, where God's power manifested in the most unlikely of circumstances. Part 4. The Triumph, Faith and Courage Conquer. The defeat of Goliath brought immediate results. The Philistines scattered, and the Israelites were emboldened by David's victory. But what was truly significant wasn't just the military success. It was the demonstration of how faith and courage can reshape the course of events. David had no military training, no armor, no weapons, but he had something far more powerful: a heart full of trust in God and the courage to act on that faith. David's triumph was not just about defeating a giant. It was about showing the world that God's power is greater than anything we can see or comprehend. Goliath represented all the obstacles, doubts, and fears that might hold us back in life. But David's victory showed that with God on our side, we can face even the most intimidating challenges without fear. Part 5. The Aftermath, a New Hero. David's victory over Goliath didn't just make him a hero in the eyes of Israel. It marked the beginning of his rise to greatness. Saul, the king, recognized David's courage and wisdom, and soon David became a trusted member of his court. But with fame came envy. Saul's jealousy grew as David's popularity soared, and David soon found himself in danger from the very king he had once served. Yet, even in the face of persecution and betrayal, David continued to trust in God's plan for him. Through this period of hardship, David's faith never wavered. He learned that victory often comes with challenges, and that true greatness isn't measured by success or fame, but by one's unwavering trust in God. He held fast to the belief that his life and his destiny were in the hands of a higher power. Faith and courage, the challenges we face in life. The battle between David and Goliath is not just an ancient tale of the weak defeating the strong. It is a living symbol of the power of faith. courage, and belief in the unseen. This is not just a message for David's time. It is one that remains relevant today. When we look at this story, we realize that each one of us faces our own Goliaths in life, no matter the era or the context. In modern life, we confront countless challenges: difficult jobs, fractured relationships, illness, personal failures, or even mental and emotional crises. These Goliaths may not always appear as towering giants, but they can be invisible fears, feelings of helplessness, or deep-seated doubts we cannot overcome alone. So, how can we, like David, stand firm in the face of these moments? Faith is the key. David did not defeat Goliath because he had a perfect slingshot or precisely accurate stones. He won because of his faith in God. This faith gave him the courage to face an enemy that no one else dared to confront. This story is not just about victory in battle, but about how we can approach life's challenges through the lens of faith. When we place our trust in something greater than ourselves, in a higher power, we are given the strength to confront fear and doubt in our own hearts. In today's world, there are countless forces that can make us feel small and powerless in the face of difficulties. However, like David, we can find our courage by having faith in something larger than ourselves, whether it's belief in God, faith in family, trust in our core values, or faith in our own abilities. Faith helps us to see life not just as a series of battles, but as a journey where each struggle is an opportunity to grow and evolve. The courage to stand up. In the story of David and Goliath, courage isn't just about confronting a strong warrior. True courage is the willingness to face challenges that seem insurmountable. The story shows us that sometimes, courage isn't the absence of fear. It's the ability to act despite it. David wasn't the strongest, nor the best warrior, but he triumphed over Goliath because he dared to do what others wouldn't do. He faced what they thought was impossible. We often seek reasons to avoid challenges because we fear failure or doubt our abilities. However, courage isn't about having no fear. It's about acting despite the fear. David didn't face Goliath without fear, but his courage came from the act of stepping forward anyway. Every action taken despite fear is a victory of the mind and spirit, the Goliaths of our modern lives. Today, we may not fight literal giants like Goliath, but we all have our own Goliaths to confront. They may take the form of career uncertainty, broken relationships, chronic illness, or overwhelming self-doubt. These fears are not easy to overcome, but they are not unconquerable either. David didn't fight alone. He had faith in God and in the truth that God was on his side. This story reminds us that, even when facing what seems impossible, we don't have to do it alone. Whether our faith is in a higher power, our inner strength, or the people we trust, faith provides the motivation to stand up against the challenges of life. We can be David. The story of David and Goliath is not about an invincible warrior. It's about an ordinary person with great faith and determination. This means that each one of us can be David. We can all face our Goliaths and win, as long as we hold on to faith and courage. It's not about our abilities, but about our willingness to take action. Think for a moment. What are the Goliaths in your life? Are they fears about the future, concerns about your career, health issues, or struggles in relationships? Remember, nothing is insurmountable when you have faith and courage. The first step in defeating these Goliaths is to realize that we can face them, and that we don't have to face them alone. A life guided by faith and courage. Life is not always easy, but the story of David and Goliath reminds us that we can stand firm, no matter how big the challenges are. Never forget that in our darkest moments, faith and courage are the two things that give us the strength to overcome. When we stand firm in our faith and refuse to give up, we not only conquer the battle, but also conquer ourselves. So, the biggest question we must all ask ourselves is, when faced with our own Goliaths, how will we respond? Will we shrink in fear and run away? Or will we stand firm with faith, courage, and determination? These decisions are the key to stepping into a future filled with self-belief and a life that can overcome anything. Ultimately, like David, we all have the ability to overcome the giants in our lives, not because we are stronger, but because we believe in something greater than ourselves. Whether it's faith in God, faith in the goodness of humanity, or faith in our own resilience, it's this faith that empowers us to move mountains and face every challenge, big or small. The choice is ours. Do we let our fears hold us back? Or do we rise up like David, ready to face any Goliath that stands in our way?